Welcome to the Gray Area Podcast. I'm your host, Kevin Gray, of course. You can check me out on Twitter at Kevin Gray Sports. Be sure to download and subscribe to the podcast wherever you get your podcast for free. Give the podcast a 5-star rating and write a review while you're there. And of course, you can catch me on 105 through the Fan hosting the Get Right with my partner Reginald at Tula every single day, Monday through Friday, 7 to 11 p.m. So excited about my guest today here on the Gray Area. Terrific writer, journalist. He is the host of seasons 3 and 6 and now 8 of Slow Burn on Slate, detailing the life and times of Supreme Court Justice Clarence Thomas. Joel Anderson joining me here on the podcast today. You can find him on Twitter at by Joel Anderson. Joel, what's going on?
I mean, I'm good, man. What's up? You can also find me at like Joel.Anderson at Blue Sky something. You know what I'm saying? So it ain't just Twitter no more. You know,
that's right.
I'm on Blue Sky. If you can find me, just look me up on there. Okay.
Okay, definitely there for sure as well. And now look. Now, Joel has been on the radio show with myself and Red, so we've been able to have some good times together. And people, as we get started here, know how they felt. Now, for those that don't know, Joel went to TCU. He's a proud TCU Horned Frog. And that's right. So this past season, Joel, people got on me because I was trying to be the realist in the room about what it was with TCU. I wasn't trying to rain on the parade or anything. But then when y'all caught that work in the national title game,
what's the realness? What's the realness about
the real is
going undefeated through the regular season?
Normally, teams of a profile such as TCU win a lot of close games. Maybe lose a Big 12 championship game. Don't necessarily profile as national championship teams. Now, there have been exceptions every now and then. Shout out to the the 0-2 Ohio State Buckeyes. They were to get away with it all-stars. And I felt like at times your TCU Horned Frogs this past season were the captains of the getaway all-stars. And they got away with it all the way to the national title game and then caught the work.
I mean, okay, so so saying you assaulted me. I feel like I'm under siege, but that's fine.
I know that's not necessarily the typical way to start off with a guest. Is like, hey, get after their school.
Right, yeah. Like, you put me on you insulted me in my school. Okay, so who do you think would have done? Who do you think could have stayed within 3 touchdowns of Georgia that night? I don't think there's anybody in the country. I think if Ohio State had to play Georgia again that night, that they would have caught that work too.
Okay.
I mean, TCU played Georgia at absolutely the worst time to play them. They had played their closest game of the year, the game they almost lost. There was no chance that TCU was going to catch Georgia slipping. Like how Missouri caught them slipping or something like that. It was like all of the energy was directed into that night. And look, TCU is not as physically impressive as Georgia. Like I think they probably got more 5-stars in their recruiting class this year than TCU has ever had come to the school in the history of the school, right? So I'm not lying, go up here and lie and say that they're as talented, but I did think there were some ways in which that game could have been more competitive if it had been played another time. But TCU caught no breaks, man. It just was like they played Georgia when all of their energy was focused on kicking their ass. And they were improving that the week before was sort of a fluke, that they were better than how they had showed against Ohio State. So, I'm not going to deny that they caught their work, but I'm also be like, I don't think a lot of other people would have done all that well against Georgia that night either.
It did feel like it was just Georgia's night and theirs to have alone, because the way that went down, anybody probably would have gotten that same work, maybe not to the degree that TCU got it, but at the same time, the larger point is correct. Yeah, Alabama, Ohio State probably would have got that work that night as well in that way.
I mean, Alabama, man, people keep talking about Alabama, but Alabama was one of those schools I didn't think it was all that good this year either. They were like, oh man, if Alabama had been in there, man, Alabama got their ass kicked too. So.
Well, we'll see for TCU, but I will say though, the amount of energy, because I'm in the DFW area, the amount of energy around the program with Max Duggan, obviously Sonny Dykes the first year taking over that program, and the way that the community embraced what TCU did this past season, it was really fun to watch. And I joke with TCU fans about how we had our back and forth throughout the course of the year, but I will say it was a pretty spectacular year for all that they accomplished, especially given the fact that the coach that was just there had that same group, and Sonny Dykes was like, oh, I got this, and we're going to go all the way to the national championship game in my first year there.
I mean, this is nothing for me to be upset about, man. Like, the majority of the year, I had a great time. Game's competitive. We pull it out. Like that's kind of what you dream about as a fan. I mean, if you're not going to win, and like obviously I didn't want us to lose 63-7 or whatever the hell it was in the championship game. But that's one weekend. I had the
Yeah.
whole year. TCU might never have another season like that again. I'm a realist. Like like for everything to come together with the talent they had, the schedule they had, it might never be that good again, man. And so for it to all come together in one year and for my school to be in a national championship game, a school like TCU, you said, you know what I'm saying? I know what you mean. You're talking about it's like we're a wild card or something. And so, I mean, I just know to appreciate that, man. And it may not be duplicated again. But, I mean, TCU, man, I consider them the champions of 2010. The year they won the Rose Bowl. They were undefeated,
That's very
untied. You know what
true.
I'm saying? Won the Rose Bowl against a Power Five program.
Uh-huh.
So, I mean, that was a year I never thought I would ever see again, too. So maybe it might happen once a decade or something. But regardless, that was an unbelievable year. But yeah, you're right. I mean, I didn't think much of TCU before the season started, and I kept being like, well, I don't know. I don't think Max Duggan's all that good. I didn't want him to be the quarterback again.
They didn't want him to be the quarterback either.
They didn't want to be quarterback. Yeah, he wasn't when the season started.
That's right.
I thought we lost. I mean, in a manner of speaking, we did still lose our best running back, Zach Evans. He transferred to Ole Miss. I just didn't expect any of that. The defense had not been as great as it been. So, like, for all that to come together, man, come on, bro. I'm living with SMU. SMU would kill for a season like that. They would definitely pay for it, but they would kill for it too.
Wow. Wow.
Shout out
to the Mustangs, getting after the Mustangs a little bit. Talk to me about how you got into sport. Obviously, you're in journalism, but you play football at TCU. Where did the love of sport come from? And then as you started to transition with your career, how does that inform the way that you go about your business and the way that you go about, covering, whether it be, events or whether it be, other things? How does sport inform you in that way?
Well, good question. So, I mean, I guess, sport is just, like a lot of boys, I grew up in Texas and, my dad, my father was a football star when he was growing up. He played in Arkansas. He's from Hot Springs, Arkansas, and he was an all-state running back in whatever segregated league they had in Arkansas at the time.
Yeah,
and he went off briefly to college. He played at some school, some school in South Dakota that actually doesn't exist anymore. And I looked up a clipping of it, and their mascot was the Savages. I don't need to tell you who the mascot was supposed to have been of, but it was like that kind of deal back in the day. But he didn't last up there very long. Too cold, didn't have enough money for winter clothes, whatever, came back home. So anyway, he always retained that love of football. And I just remember my earliest memories of childhood of watching football with him in the living room of our house and him playing with me. And so he got me into sports, and I was good at everything as a kid. I played basketball, I ran track, soccer, baseball, and especially football. And so like I just had that love of the game very early, and was really good at it. And, like anything that you're good at, you just want to keep doing. And I was just kind of a nerd too, man. When all the Athlon preseason books came out and all that stuff, I would get that, man. And I just read through it, and I would read the daily newspaper, man, the Houston Chronicle and the Houston Post. And it was just like, I couldn't get enough of reading about sports. I had a Sports Illustrated, not a Sports Illustrated for kids subscription. I had a Sports Illustrated subscription as a child. Like,
you had the grown version.
Yeah, I wanted to read. You know what I'm saying? I want to read, and I probably didn't understand everything all that much, but like I still got the gist of it. And so yeah, man. So that's kind of where it all started. And then I get to college and play football, and it doesn't quite go like I think it's going to. Like if I had gone to college today, like I probably would have transferred and played somewhere else. But transferring was so prohibitive back in the 90s. And I was just like, well, man, I'm not going nowhere. And so somebody at the journalism department helped find me some money to stay at school. And I found a job on campus and worked at the school newspaper. And I just kind of got into it. And I always knew that I wanted to be a writer. I'd always have just kind of said, if I couldn't play in a Super Bowl, I wanted to cover one. I ain't done either, but the point remains. Like that's kind of how I got into it, and so that's how my career got started too.
And for you, then, as you started to get into writing, into the journalistic aspect of your career, what was something that drove you, that allowed you to continue to pursue this? Because obviously, the business of journalism, the covering of different events, political or otherwise, not an easy line of work. What made you want to stick with that particular career based off of what you were doing at that time?
Well, when I was starting out, it was totally different. I mean, newspapers were still, like doing fairly well
Mm-hmm.
financially. It wasn't, I don't think Craigslist had been invented then. You know what I'm saying? Like when I got to college, I got my first email address. So like this internet thing had not really, it had not popped quite like it had now. So I was looking at a field. I was like, oh, I can move to any major city in this country. I can work at their newspaper. I can cover their NFL, their NBA, their Major League Baseball team, their college team, and hope to move up and cover a better pro team and then become a columnist someday. That was always just sort of my plan. So, I got a job right out of school, man, which is crazy, for journalists now, man. I mean, like
Yeah.
that's I'm not going to say that's unheard of, but that's a much harder thing. But most of the people that I graduated with that went into journalism, they were able to get jobs right out of school. And I got a job at the Associated Press. And at the Associated Press, early on, especially if you're young, you just kind of like work on the desk. Like you do rewrites of newspaper items from Marshall, Texas and Lubbock, Texas and all that kind of
Yeah.
stuff. And I did rewrites that you hear on the radio. If your local NPR station is like at the top of the hour, here are the top news stories today. Like I was writing that kind of stuff on the news desk, just kind of getting the basics down and all that sort of stuff. And then, they said, "Hey, man, do you want to do this kind of stuff? You want to do this kind of stuff?" And then my career kind of took off from there. But man, it was just such a totally different environment. Like you felt like you could go anywhere and do anything. And so that's kind of the environment I went into. And I just kind of thought my career is going to take me whatever. I think my ultimate dream was to have been like one of those long takeout writers at Sports Illustrated, like the
Mm-hmm.
Gary Smiths, the Ralph
Mm.
Wileys, the Rick Rileys. When Rick Riley was like that dude, like
Yeah.
that was what I really wanted to do when I got into the game.
Kind of like the long form type of writing and
The
then
long form
magazine.
stuff.
Yeah.
Yeah, man. Yeah. I would buy, anthologies of long sports stories and features and profiles. And
Mm-hmm.
like that was always my favorite thing. I would read all the biographies and autobiographies of athletes I could, when I was a kid, middle school, high school, all that kind of stuff. Like I'm reading Brian Bosworth, uh, autobiography, that kind of
Uh-huh.
stuff. So yeah, so I always kind of thought that's where I would end up at in the game.
Now, obviously, Missouri City, Texas, Houston area, playing
Mhm.
football growing up, and obviously in the college. I can't not talk to you about football and not ask you, especially with the Houston Oilers back in the day, what did someone like Warren Moon mean to you as far as growing up, watching him play quarterback, but more so that kind of figure having that kind of success playing in Houston in that way?
No, I mean it was a big deal. Like I guess it's interesting because um I like my earliest memories of the Oilers are them being bad. Like when I was a baby,
Sure.
when I was born in 78, 79, 80, they were really, really good. They were knocking on the door to get into the Super Bowl and they kept losing to the Steel Curtain, the Pittsburgh Steelers. And so they were bad, like, and I'm like 4, 5, 6 years old. And then two things happened as around the time I'm 6 or 7 years old. Um, the Oilers got Warren Moon. He came down from the Canadian Football League, but also there was a USFL then, and the USFL was
Mm-hmm.
like a much more viable league at the time. Like the Houston Gamblers had Jim Kelly as their
Yeah.
quarterback. You know what I mean? So like there was like just all this great football there, man. And so yeah, I'm watching all this great football, and I'm very young. I don't have a lot of preconceived notions about what football is like, so it never occurred to me that it was unusual for a black man to be a starting quarterback in the NFL. You know what I mean? Until
Mm-hmm.
like as I got older, then I'm realizing that this dude is sort of a groundbreaking kind of guy, groundbreaking figure. But it just made me think like, oh, like why isn't everybody doing this? Like clearly, like how did Warren Moon slip? Like how do teams miss on this guy? Like he's so
Yeah.
good. And then like why aren't other teams like this thoughtful about it? And so yeah, and Houston was really good in that way, man. Like I always like to point out the the first black quarterback to win the Heisman Trophy played at the University of Houston, Andre Ware. So I'm
Mm-hmm.
watching that. These are my favorite teams. I'm just watching black quarterbacks deal the whole time, and so I'm like, what's
This
wrong
is
with everybody
normal.
else?
Yeah.
Yeah, what is wrong with y'all? You know what I'm saying? Why haven't y'all figured this out? Like clearly, black quarterbacks can play the game. So, but like Warren Moon was just such a larger than life figure. I'll never forget. He came to our middle school one time, and he didn't talk to nobody. I didn't, at least there wasn't no speech. I didn't see nothing like that. But I just saw him walking around on campus, and I'm going into the room, and I just was like, oh, I was like frozen, and I pointed at him, and I'll never forget. He just turned around and looked at me and pointed back, and I was like, oh man, Warren Moon saw me, dog.
Yeah,
So
yeah.
yeah, man, like he was just a hero of mine, man. He was such a big deal. Like that's just yeah, I'll never love another team like I did those Houston Oilers teams with Warren Moon. Like that's just impossible. Like that, those are my favorite teams of all time. So,
And it's funny because the way that this conversation is going is I started thinking about obviously the NFL, the black quarterback today. We had two for the very first time in the Super Bowl with Patrick Mahomes and Jalen Hurts with the Chiefs and the Eagles, and both of them playing
Texas guys.
Both of them Texas guys. Yeah, exactly. Both of them Texas guys. And the way that they played the game, obviously, we have seen the advent of the black quarterback over the last several years. One of my favorites growing up, Michael Vick, before, all the stuff. But at the same time, as you've watched the game grow, what has struck you about how the NFL has changed, not just the economics and the business of the game, but the way that the game is played and who was at the forefront of the game, especially when you look at the Mahomeses, the Hurtses, and any of these other quarterbacks, black quarterbacks that are now really have taken over the NFL in that way?
Oh, that's an interesting question. I mean, more broadly, what's changed for the game to me is that it's on all the damn time. Like I feel like it was a much bigger deal to me. Like when I was a kid, and actually, what was crazy is that Houston for a time did not sell out its home games, and it used to be that if you didn't sell out your home games, they wouldn't show those games on TV because they tried to. The thought was that we're encouraging people to go to the stadium, and if you show it on TV, they're not going to go to the game, right? And so there were a lot of games that I didn't even see on Sunday. Like I had to listen to the radio to listen to football. And so it was such a big deal. Man, the University of Houston was in the first ever Thursday night football game, college football game. Like they played against Miami.
I did not know that. Wow.
Yeah. I mean, they got their ass kicked by the University of Miami. It was Dave Klingler versus like Warren Sapp and them boys. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah. Those boys were tough in Miami. Yeah.
It was tough. But yeah, so I mean, it was just like it felt like a big event, and I mean, it would be impossible for anything to feel like football felt to me back then, but like it just was a much bigger deal to watch football on TV, frankly, when I was a kid, because you didn't get a chance to see it all the time. In terms of the people at the front of the game, what has changed? I mean, yeah, man. I mean, I just think about all the guys that I used to love growing up. You mentioned Michael Vick, Vince Young, I'm trying to think of some other guys, like maybe not Tony Rice, because I don't think he would have ever really. I don't think he would have hit like that. Yeah, Woody Dantzler, but just the running black quarterbacks that always used to have to change positions. Or I even think Texas football fans will appreciate this. Reggie McNeil was the quarterback at Texas A&M, really good, highly touted guy. Had a pretty good college career. Had a lot of physical tools, and when he came out of college, he had to switch to wide receiver, and it like nobody was like, that's stupid. Like he spent his whole life playing quarterback, and you guys are making him play a position he's never played before. So that kind of stuff just happened all the time, and that was very frustrating. And so like it feels really good to see a guy like Jalen Hurts, who frankly 10, 15 years ago, that dude would have never got drafted.
No.
You know what I mean? Like Tommy Frazier didn't get, Charlie Ward didn't get drafted. You know what I mean? Charlie Ward told people not to draft him if he wasn't going to be a first round pick. But the point is that guys like that were athletic, it was like there was some sort of penalty for being athletic and being able to run at that position. Yeah. And it was just like really cool to see a guy like Jalen Hurts play in a Super Bowl and thrive. And it was just like, you all could have been doing this the whole time. Like if NFL coaches, if it was truly a meritocracy, they would have known, they would have been able to tap into that much sooner. But and they'll never be able to make up for all the guys that had to go to Canada, change positions, just give up the game because they didn't get their fair shake. But that part of it is really, really cool to see, the game grow in that way.
You mentioned one of my favorite quarterbacks growing up. Tommy Frazier was so cold in Nebraska. I didn't watch Nebraska no other time except for them years when Tommy Frazier was out here running wild on them boys. I was like, that cat right there was cold. Tommy Frazier.
Oh yeah, man. I mean, it's crazy now because this is like 30 years ago, and like I sound like an old person. You know what I mean? And I just probably when people were telling me about Bullet Bob Hayes or something when I was a kid, you know what I mean? But
that's what it feels like now.
That's what it is. That's what it is for kids now. But I'm just like, yo, like go watch tape of Tommy Frazier. Like, he was a really good athlete. The game looks different. Like, it's
Mm-hmm.
like basically 20 people in a box
Yeah.
in football in the 90s. But like, that dude was cold, man. And yeah, man, that he never got a chance. Now, he had health issues too. I think he had like
Sure.
blood clots and stuff like that. But
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
yeah, man, yeah, Tommy was cold, man. Kids, man, if y'all listen, y'all go look at some clips. Go look at
Yeah, hit
some
that
cute
YouTube and go look
nights.
at Tommy Frazier, man. He'll blow your
Mm-hmm.
mind. It's funny because we're
Yeah.
talking about the NFL. We'll talk a little college football here because Deion Sanders, such a polarizing figure. And the reason why I bring him up is
Yeah.
I'm thinking about just the new age of college football, transfer portal. These guys can go pretty much wherever they want, however they want, and really have some autonomy in terms of their career. But the changing landscape of college football, the big money that's involved, my man Brett Yormark, the commissioner of the Big 12, taking cats to Mexico now, like a whole expansion going on with this whole thing. What is the state of college football in your mind based on all the things that we're starting to see in terms of the game changing, the popularity of the sport, and someone like Deion and what he's trying to do at Colorado these days?
There's gradually more acknowledgement that this is professional football.
Yeah.
They don't call it that, but I mean, there's just more of an acknowledgement. I mean, like, Deion is actually sort of the perfect idea. Like, he's not talking about, I'm gonna graduate these boys or anything like that, or not pretending that this is some sort of an academic endeavor. He's just like, if y'all can't play, I'm making you leave. And he's very open about it. I don't agree with that. I don't think that's good. Like, I wouldn't want my son to play for him, but like, I can appreciate that it's a much more honest approach to the game and the system than it used to be. So yeah, I mean, that's the thing for me. Like, I mean, we're talking about expanding playoffs. The top teams are going to play 15, 16 games a year. They play Thursday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Friday,
Mm-hmm.
sometimes Sunday. It's professional football. I mean, that's just,
It
you know what I mean? Like,
is.
they're on TV.
It is.
The only thing that doesn't make it professional is that the players don't get paid. Everybody else is getting paid commensurate to like what professional football is. The games are being held all at the same time. There's all this enthusiasm around there, broadcast by even the same broadcast crews. It's just the players don't get paid, but it's professional football, and
Yeah.
so that's what I think it is now. And that's the next step. I'm happy. I'm I'm a little torn on like the massive changes and how the game is going to look and how the transfer portal works both ways. Like, I like that kids have the options to move and go find better opportunities for them, but the coaches can also abuse that as well.
Mm-hmm.
Which is what I think Deion is doing. So, I I'm happy, but I think the next step and the most important step is making sure that the players actually get paid for real. Like, not just they got to hustle up some extra work through NIL. Like, that they should actually get their share of the TV revenue and the ticket revenue that they generate. Like, I think that's the next step. But I think that's where we're at. I mean, that's what Deion represents, the professionalization of college football.
I make you NCAA president for a day and you have unlimited power to do whatever you want. How are you changing NIL and some of the things around it to get this more equitable in terms of who's getting paid, how they're getting paid, and what that looks like in college sports?
Well, if I was the president of the NCAA, I probably would shut down the organization. I just be like, well, we don't need.
You're
Anymore.
shut it down altogether.
Yeah, right. Like, you guys hire yourselves a commissioner and like do this the right way.
Yeah.
But I mean, if I was, obviously, if I was, I would want the players to get paid. It ain't even just about NIL. Like, NIL is just a dodge. You know what I mean? It's
Yeah.
just a way to like, hey, y'all pay them while we keep this money. You know what I mean? Like, this pot is for us. Now, if y'all can scrounge up some money or get these boys some extra benefits or some, Bijan Robinson had I don't know, like a Ferrari or something. Like,
Yeah.
yeah, they can do all that, but like, no, like, the important thing is making sure that these boys get paid and girls. I mean, the women that play college basketball, all that sort of stuff. Like, Caitlin Clark should get a little cut of some of that TV money. You know what I mean? So,
Mm-hmm.
Angel Reese should get a cut of that money. So that would be my thing if I was. But I would. That's why I would never be the head of the NCAA, because I don't think it needs to exist. And everything I'd be doing was totally out of line with what the member institutions would want. So that's why
Yeah.
I'm not. The NCAA don't have to worry. I'm never going to be president.
Don't worry about it because you're not gonna have a job if Joel running around anyway at that
Yeah,
point.
right. Yeah, right. Exactly. Man, go get your job over there at NBC or something. So.
That's right. Which is interesting because apparently the athletic director at Notre Dame, Jack Swarbrick's like, yeah, I'm stepped down, and an NBC TV executive is like, yeah, I'm gonna take over here. Like I saw
Yeah,
it's just like, okay, well, we'll see you later, Jack. Here comes NBC.
that's what it is. The Big Ten commissioner before Kevin Warren. I mean, all these guys,
Mm-hmm.
Brett Yarmark. I mean, they're coming from like real big. They're not college guys like they used to be. It used to be athletic directors and college. They were like people that had been in the game or were former coaches or athletic directors, and came up that like
Mm-hmm.
very old school pipeline. These are business people now. That are coming to the game and running things. And so, I mean, this is professional football. This is
I mean, I'm about to say the whole thing is this is professional
yeah.
football. I mean, you mentioned your mark. My man came over from Rock Nation's like, yeah, I got this.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. I mean, it's just like, yo, that guy wouldn't have no place in college football. It would have been absurd to have hired that dude, which is basically, you're talking about a record label guy, like coming
Yeah,
in and kind of like, if they had made that hire in 1997, everybody would think this is absurd. But now it's just like, that's what you got to do.
it's
So,
just commonplace these days.
yeah.
Before we get to slow burn real quick, when you look at the overall landscape of sport, we've seen this whole thing with Liv and the PGA Tour and them getting married formally now, apparently with all that money. That's another conversation for another day. Just the economics and business of sport. It feels like there's just a new day with all the money. I was looking at Jacksonville and their new stadium, future stadium that they're going to sink at least $1 billion into. It just seems like there's just so much money that it feels like we're on the precipice of this being either getting out of control or something landmark is going to happen. Where do you feel like the economics of sport is right now, given all the changes that we're seeing, whether it be the NFL, NBA, and elsewhere?
Yeah, that's a really broad question. I'm not an economist, man. Let's see. So let me think. I guess,
And let me say this. Let me say the way that for you, with your lens, you covering the sports that are out there or whatever the case may be, and you're looking at it and you're just seeing this change. What does that look like from a journalist perspective based off of what's happening there in that way?
Well, more than I guess maybe that it's just tough because I think it's the contentization of everything. That like everything is tailored for the TV viewing audience, and there's always a bunch of it, and there's always talk about growth, expansion, figuring out more ways to get more games in front of people's eyes. And it's just sort of overwhelming. I don't know how people keep up with sports like anymore. I don't like, I'm sort of a new father. So I don't get to watch as much as I used to anyway, but I'm just like, how do people have time to keep up with everything? Like, it just seems, with the growth of the games and everything else. And, people be like, I watched this game and I watched that. And I got a fantasy team and there's just so much more to do with sports now. Like it seems like a really good time if you're like if you're really interested in everything. And like now you can watch Premier League soccer or you can watch Mexican League soccer on TV. You know what I mean? Like you can watch almost anything on TV now, which is great if that's the way that you want to consume sports. But it also just takes away sort of the, not specialness isn't the word, but it used to seem more like an event. And like the only things that seem like an event now are maybe the Super Bowl. Like the NBA finals don't seem like an event. They just seem like something that is on TV. Baseball has always sort of been like that, but like everything just seems like it's on TV for 3 hours and it kind of goes away and then you don't get time to digest it. And, yeah, that's I don't. My broader thought is that that it seems like it's really overwhelming, and I wonder how much appetite for sports Americans are going to continue to have. Like all the money, all the investment, all the infrastructure we put into it. It just seems like at some point that like interest, you can't grow forever. It just seems to me that the interest will erode.
It has to be a cap at some point in some form or fashion.
Yeah. Mark Cuban kind of said something about that about the NFL a few years ago, but I think that was more like, wishful thinking, but he was just like, because he was
it felt like he might was doing like the Max Kellerman thing with Tom Brady. He gonna eventually fall off a cliff one day. Vince is gonna happen.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, like in 1 year you will be right? I don't know if Mark Cuban is going to be right, but he just talked about how the NFL, man, they just keep flooding the market with games and stuff. And I mean, man, those Thursday games are horrible. A lot of football on a lot of NFL TV on football. Low key is bad, man.
It really is.
very
Yes.
few very good games that I actually see, of the ones
Uh-huh.
that I see. So I just wonder, like, blanketing the airwaves like that. I just wonder if eventually people will be like, not a big deal. I'll catch you later. I'll catch you later. I'll watch the next thing. And I don't know that we can all keep up with that and watch all the millions of shows that people watch now too. At least I
Yes.
can't.
Yes.
I don't know how people have the bandwidth for all that, but
Yeah.
maybe that's that maybe I'm just speaking about like me. I don't know if that applies to everybody else, but it seems to me that we're kind of getting up on it being enough.
Yeah. Yeah. And you can record it on one of your 15 million apps that you got and you can watch it later. It's something like
Yeah,
that.
yeah. The intentions is you pull something. It's like, how can I sit down and watch a damn, you know, how do I have time to watch Premier League all the time? I just don't know how people have to do that, but well.
Well, hopefully, if they're not watching anything, they're listening to Slow Burn. Season 8 of Slow
Appreciate
Burn.
that, bro. A nice
Yeah.
transition. Appreciate that. Professional.
Oh no,
Professional.
I
You know what I'm
appreciate that,
saying? You know what I'm
man.
saying?
I
Saying good.
try,
You know
man.
what I'm
Yeah, I appreciate that. I work
saying?
on my craft. Season 8 of Slow Burn. I'm so fascinated by this because Clarence Thomas, one of the most polarizing American figures in politics, really ever at this point. What made you dive into the subject matter of Clarence Thomas, and why was this the one for season 8 that you felt like this would be the project that was this something that you've been wanting to do for a while, or was this kind of something that kind of came to you in that way?
Yeah, I've always just kind of had a list of, to the extent that I was going to do projects like this. Like he was always sort of on there. And then there was the thought, okay, this summer the Supreme Court is going to rule on affirmative action. And probably, given the makeup of the court. But I don't know, they just had a really surprise ruling on the Voting Rights Act the other day. But um the idea is probably that affirmative action is going to, be struck down and probably not exist in quite the way that it has for the last 50 years in America. And so um, I thought that I wanted to tell that story, like Clarence
Mm-hmm.
Thomas, through that lens. And that was a really neat way to make a sales pitch. But then all this other stuff started happening, right? The Harlan Crow record, revelations and ethics concerns and everything else. But bottom line, I just thought, oh, this guy is sort of fascinating. And it seemed like his story would lend itself well to the sort of storytelling that we like to do at Slow Burn. And people that have been in the news so long that you think all there is to know about them, they're just sort of
Mm-hmm.
there. They're like you're like oxygen. You just take it for granted. A lot of people. Let's see. So you said you're 36.
Mm-hmm.
So I mean, Clarence Thomas has been a prominent figure pretty much all your life.
Yeah,
You
he
know,
has. Yeah.
yeah, and he's been a prominent figure for most of mine. But then you just have to make some assumptions about who he is, where he's
Mm-hmm.
from, what his motivations are, without really
Especially in light of
interrogating
recent
that.
events.
Yeah, exactly.
Yes.
Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. And so I was interested to tell that story.
Mm-hmm.
And then we just really I got really fortunate that I was able to eventually convince them that this is, something that we should be trying to do.
What surprised you most about what you learned about him, his story, his family, or any other aspect that you may not have thought coming into this that has actually informed you even more about how his story and his life has gone?
I mentioned this somewhere else, so sorry for telling maybe repeating myself, but um, I was all surprised at how connected to the Black community he was.
Mm-hmm.
Because I think growing up, my most vivid images of Clarence Thomas growing up, there used to be this Black general interest magazine called Emerge magazine. It was owned by a businessman named George Curry, who is no longer with us. And in 1993 or four, because my parents had a subscription, they had two cover stories. One with Clarence Thomas on the cover, kind of like an Aunt Jemima. He had like a handkerchief on his head, and
Mm-hmm.
another one of him as a lawn jockey, right? And it was not uncommon to hear Black people I knew call him an Uncle Tom, right? And so you're thinking, oh, what kind of person is this person? Where is he from? What are his motivations? And I, I'm looking at the guy on TV. I'm looking at the things that he's saying. If I found it hard to believe, I would have found it hard to believe that this guy has Black friends, and his entry point into conservatism was through Black people, not necessarily white people, right? Like his first jobs were connected with white conservatives, but the people that really made him more comfortable in that space and that groomed him and really worked to elevate him were a lot of Black conservatives in the late 70s, early 80s. So that part of it, that he's from Georgia, He hangs out with black folks. He has black friends. He dated black women up until he married Jenny Thomas. It just, I did not know that he was as steeped in the black community as that. But then when you think about it and you step back and you're like, oh, I know Clarence Thomas. All of us, for the most part, every black person in this country has a Clarence Thomas in their family or somewhere in, in or around their social circle, because it's, if you listen to episode 2 of Slow Burn, we have a historian on, and she wrote a book about black Republicans. And the thing is that a lot of black people are conservative, not as many are Republican. And so, but you can hear and you can see the Clarence Thomases. And so it all started to make sense as I started doing all this research and writing about him. But at the time, before all that, I'm just thinking, oh, this guy's a creation of white America. He's, uh, grew up in the suburbs somewhere or something, never was around black people, totally disconnected from his community. No. Like that is not his story.
And that's what I found most fascinating. Listening to the first couple of episodes, I'm from Kansas City, Missouri, and seeing how Missouri was really kind of one of the inflection points of his early life, given some of the things that wound up transpiring for him. And I was just blown away at how much it seemed like, I mean, for lack of a better term, it seemed like Clarence Thomas was about it back then in terms of what he felt like in terms of, black and, black power and all the kinds of things that he was dealing with at the time, that the switch for him and how that came about and the lens in which he was informed through it. I just found that completely fascinating. Did you expect that based on what you were initially knowing about him? Or is that something that came as like, oh, wow, I didn't realize that was the entry point for him in that way?
I had heard of the Black Panther stuff before. You know what I mean? I'd read a little bit about him and was familiar with his alleged, activist or, radical era. The one thing that I would say about it is that he definitely participated, and he was part of his Black Student Union when he went to the College of Holy Cross, which is his undergrad education. The thing I always think about it, and my thesis that I'm sort of working through is like, I don't actually think he's changed that much. The things that he liked about that time, if you like Malcolm X, the Nation of Islam is like sort of a conservative organization, like very religious, very male-centered, male-dominated, in terms of, social and cultural lifestyle. Like, I mean, it's a sort of a, very fundamentally conservative organization. And so it's very compatible to have adopted all that, to, put on the costume of the radical and say that I want to join the Nation of Islam and I love Malcolm X. And you can still believe all the things that he believed, Malcolm X believed, and still be a conservative. And so that was the piece of it for me that I was just like, oh, okay. That part of it was just sort of was interesting to me. Not that he had been a college radical or that other stuff, but that like how it was still consistent with who he ultimately became. Yeah. And that, somebody else mentioned this too. It's just like, he was reputed to walk in campus. He had a, big afro, wore combat boots, camouflage, all that stuff. And for people who have not listened to the series, Clarence Thomas initially wanted to be a priest. He went to the seminary until he was about 18, 19 years old, gets out. Guy that had not had a lot of experience with women, lived a very chaste, sort of, very quiet, peaceful life. Of course, when you went to college, you're on your own for the first time. You're going to try some different stuff out, man. You know what I'm saying? And try to like recreate yourself to this new group of people. Well, what better in the late 60s or early 70s is to put on the Black Panther shit? You know what I'm I'm sorry, I didn't even.
No, you're good. Yeah. You good.
Okay, my bad. Yeah. Okay, my bad. So anyway, so what's better than to put that sort of stuff on and draw attention to yourself and try to recreate the narrative about your life? So that's what I sort of think about. That like I do think that he shares some of those beliefs with those alleged leftist or college radicals or whatever, but also it's fundamentally compatible with the person that he is today too.
It's fascinating to listen to the first couple of episodes. I've just found myself riveted because I felt I had one perception of him coming in that has completely flipped based on what he has experienced through the first couple of episodes listening to. And as I get ready to let you go here, I want to ask you this. For those who haven't listened or are going to be listening to this series, what do you want them to take from Slow Burn this season based on the story that you were telling of Clarence Thomas, not just his life then, but obviously now, and how that informs how people view him?
Well, I mean, I mean, I think the important thing is that, again, I mentioned that, Clarence Thomas has been sort of a fixed um, idea in our lives for most of our lives. And he's had a tremendous impact on this country from all the issues, voting rights, um, voting rights, abortion, uh, gun rights, all this sort of stuff. He's had an impact on this stuff. And, again, I think that everybody, for somebody that powerful, somebody that was thought to be just sort of, an intellectual lightweight when he got put on there and that he was just going to be sort of following in behind Justice Antonin Scalia, man, like, I hope people take away that um, Clarence Thomas is a much more complicated character than you might think, that he's not just, a far right reactionary. He is, but he's also more than that. And there's reasons for how he got to that. And it has huge implications for the country now and going forward. And that's what I want people to take from it. That, like, there's nothing quite as simple as it seems with that guy. And, I hope people just kind of give it a chance. I mean, I've heard people say and that never would have thought, and I even kind of felt this way. Like, there are points in the story you're like, man, I feel sorry for the dude. You know what I mean? Like, I spent a lot of time with this material and talking to people that care about him and still do. And you can see where, like, he's a charming person that people might gravitate to him and feel good about, want good things for him. But it's just, um, there's a lot of stuff underneath the surface there. And so that's kind of what I hope this season is about, like getting under that surface and kind of exploring it and seeing how we got here, man. Which is,
It is.
Lord, we in trouble. Anyway, yeah, we in trouble.
It's a lot. It's a lot. If it's anything to the first couple episodes, it's an incredible listen. I've thoroughly enjoyed it so far. It's Slow Burn, Becoming Justice Thomas, season 8, a slow burn on Slate with Joel Anderson. Joel, tell the folks where they can find you and the work that you're doing these days and where they can get Slow Burn and be able to listen to it.
Yeah, no, sure. I mean, first, you can listen to Slow Burn anywhere you listen to podcasts, Apple, Spotify. You can go to the Slate homepage. I'm on Twitter by Joel Anderson, ByJoelanderson. May not be there forever because Twitter kind of crazy now too. So I don't know.
Boy, yeah. There's a lot going on there too.
A lot going on there. I'm on Blue Sky. If anybody got that beta invite, I'm on there. You can look me up. But basically, just go look my work up, man, on Slate and the podcast, and that'll make me happy enough.
Well, this has been a terrific conversation. I sincerely appreciate you taking the time with me here on the Gray Area Podcast. I thoroughly enjoy your work, man, and I'm so happy for you and your success. I came across you for the first time listening to Bomani Jones's podcast, and I had no idea that you were from Texas, went to TCU, and have come to obviously enjoy your story and the way that you've gone about your career. So I appreciate you hanging out with me here on the Gray Area Podcast today.
Oh, no, bro. Of course, Kevin, man. Appreciate it. I always have fun with you and Reg, man. Anytime, man. Anytime you want me to have back. Thank you so much, man. Appreciate y'all holding it down. Y'all not bad for dudes who live in Dallas, so I appreciate it.
Hey, now. Hey, yeah. I figured you was going to get one in at some point. I figured you was going to get that in. You was able to slide that in, man. But I appreciate the time, man. Thank you.
Of course, bro. Absolutely. Anytime.
That's it for this episode of the Gray Area Podcast. Again, you can find the podcast on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, wherever you get your podcasts for free. Make sure you download and subscribe and give it a 5-star rating and give it a review while you're there. And you can also watch this on YouTube as well on my channel at Kevin Gray Sports on YouTube. Until Monday, I'll talk to y'all later. Peace.